News Talk 102.3, 1240 on the AM side. We go to the phone line.
And we want to welcome back Daniel Miller to the program. He's with the Texas Nationalist movement, and he is here to tell us all about that and what they have been up to lately. Good morning, Daniel.
Hi, good morning, guys.
Well, let's give everybody an overview of what has been called Texit.
Sure. Texit is if it sounds like an almost familiar term, it's probably because it is. A lot of people know the term Brexit from the media, and that was when the UK voted to leave the European Union. Interestingly enough, the term Texit came about even a bit before that, sort of a same thing in dealing with Greece. But the bottom line is it's become a term that encompasses the desire for a large number of Texans to leave the Union and become a self-governing independent nation state and preserve liberty and, do what's right for Texas and reclaim that right of self-government.
Well, what happens if we do that?
Wow, there's a lot of things that happen. First and foremost, and for me personally, one of the most attractive things is we get a government that begins and ends at the borders of Texas. There is a sense that a lot of people have that there is a problem in the relationship between Texas and the federal government, and they're not wrong. Our organization, the Texas Nationalist Movement, has been engaged in this fight. As a matter of fact, November will be our 15th year. We'll start our 16th year of going out there and fighting for this. But recently, a couple of years ago, I encapsulated a lot of the sentiment that's driving this into a book called Texit, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union. And, you look at things like, that I brought out in the book and things that we've talked about in the TNM, that on average, Texas taxpayers overpay anywhere from $103 to $160 billion into the federal system. That's more money going into the federal system than we get back in either direct grants or services. So, you look at something like that, you realize that just that aspect of our relationship with the federal government, it has the economic equivalent of a Hurricane Harvey event hitting Texas every 9 months. That's money that could better be served either staying here in Texas and being spent according to our priorities and our challenges, or frankly, staying in the pockets of the Texas taxpayers.
Well, Daniel, where do we rank in the world as an economically?
Well, depending on, year on year, we typically will rank somewhere either number 9 with the 9th largest or 10th largest economy in the world. And our figures, our research has shown that, when we become a self-governing independent nation state and we shed ourselves of, a lot of that federal bureaucracy and over-regulation, we can be aiming for number 5 or number 6 in the world. We've projected that our economy could roughly be the size of the UK's economy with the absence of the federal government, and I'll explain why. People don't necessarily understand why that is typically, but here's what it boils down to. There was and it's highlighted in this great study that was done a few years back at George Mason University. With the effect of something called federal regulatory accumulation, right? And I think we all are pretty well aware that the federal government has never met a regulation they didn't like. And so year after year, they layer these regulations one on the other. And so George Mason University, this team there wanted to do a study and see what that meant to the average person, right? The average taxpayer. And what they found out was, at the time of the release of the study, the average median household income was about $58,000. They said that in the absence of the federal regulatory accumulation, the regulatory superstate emanating from Washington, D.C., that figure, that average median household income would be $330,000. So, we're looking right off the bat at being able to shed that federal regulatory accumulation and everyone getting about a 5 to 6 times bump in the take-home pay or the value of their take-home pay just by being a self-governing independent nation state.
Well, let me ask you a couple of things real quick, because I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. I thought that we ought to do this a long time ago, and I thought I wouldn't live long enough to see a new civil war. I'm not so sure that I'm not going to have to live very much longer to make that happen or get to see that. If you take the nation's map, and there's vast parts of the country that are red, and there's high populated areas that are blue, if it were not for the Electoral College, then we would have a different crew in the White House the last couple of times we've had an election. We're on the verge, to me, of being the same way. If you look at us, there'll be Fort Worth and Dallas, which is turned a little bit blue. Harris County's blue as it can be. San Antonio's probably going to be blue. Maybe El Paso and maybe a little bit on the border. There's a whole lot of red out there that, if we don't start our own Electoral College, is going to not have a voice in about in no time at all. How do you guys, can you go to all of those commissioners' courts and explain what the situation is and get something done locally so a vote in Brownwood or in, Big Spring is going to mean something versus those big populated centers where they're going to call every shot for the state? And don't we need to get this done before that just happens wholesale down the line?
Yeah, I mean, two points. Number one is, there's obviously some work that we need to do both before and after an independence referendum, right? There's some governance issues that we need to work on right here, like curbing the power of the governor, for one. That's another story. But I think that, the other thing that I think we probably need to unpack here is this idea that somehow these urban areas in Texas are monolithically blue. And I would propose this, that people really need to take a real hard look at the belief that those areas are super solid blue or Democrat or socialist or whatever you want to call them. Because, as the years have progressed, more and more information has started to come out showing that we have an electoral crisis here in Texas. And that electoral crisis is voter fraud that takes place in these major urban areas, and specifically in those areas that are what we would consider solid blue. So what that means is that you've got folks that live in those areas right now that probably think a lot like we do, but they're not being represented at the polls. Their voice is being squelched and suppressed by this massive or potentially massive amount of voter fraud. The other thing that I think we've got to consider when it comes to those areas is the fact that the reason that some of them may be blue and some of those people may be thinking along those Democrat lines is, unfortunately, a lot of our politics is partisan, and that partisan politics doesn't really emanate from Texas. It flows into Texas from the outside. So you have people that may be running here as Democrats that are parroting the talking points of those federal level Democrats like the Bernie Sanders and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Joe Bidens and the Kamala Harris and all those guys, where that may not necessarily be the case. I'll tell you, I had an interview many years ago with a reporter from a radio station, one of those radio networks, and after the interview was over, he said, I wanted to tell you a story. He says, I'm obviously a Democrat because of who I work for. He said, but I went to go visit these friends of mine in Massachusetts, and when I told them that I supported gun rights, he said they thought I was, the most right-wing person they'd ever met. So my first question to him is, wow, why do you have friends in Massachusetts? And second is, well, are you sure that this is, are you sure that you're a Democrat? Because if being blue means parroting that Biden and Harris and everything else, that stuff doesn't necessarily play. Texas is important for us because it ultimately takes us out of that sort of partisan fray, right? And really pits the argument where it needs to be, which is Texans as a whole versus the federal bureaucracy and really average Texans like me and you and everyone else against a well-entrenched political establishment that just has nothing but gain from this uneven relationship with the union?
Well, I don't know. And I've got friends that have moved here from California, and I worked in Austin for a while, and folks that had moved down here from the Upper East Coast to run away from things, and then when you talk to them, they're on the verge of voting those same things in right here, and you kind of go, "You're joking, aren't you?" "Oh, no, this is the way to do it." Well, hell, it wasn't working where you ran from.
Yeah, it seems like, and look, we run into, I mean, as you can imagine, we run into folks from all of those various states that are leaving those states. We refer to them in the organization as political, economic, and cultural refugees, right? And it is a fact that some of those people, they move here for our economic opportunities or whatever, and want to continue those policies that made their states failures in the first place. But we also have found in equal measure people that are moving here because they believe that Texas will be leaving the Union sooner than later, and they want to be a part of it. And we get asked a lot, I'll give this aside really quickly. We get asked a lot about what our attitude is about that. And our organization doesn't have a litmus test to say, were you born here? Not everybody can be a sixth-generation Texan, right? And what I point to is the fact that you had people like Crockett and William Barrett Travis and Sam Houston and many of these people who fought and many who died in the Texas Revolution for the sole purpose of gaining Texas independence. And so, if they set the bar, who are we to hold a higher standard, right? So the standard for us is, are you promoting pro-liberty, good governance, and independence? And if that's the case, and you want to make Texas your home, and you want to come here and be a Texan and express and live out those Texas values, we're with you. But if regardless of what state you came from, even if that state is Texas, if you stand against independence and the freedom and independence of Texas and liberty and individual rights and things like that, you're just as worthless to me as someone who moved here from another state and espouses those things.
Daniel would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Good morning, sir. I've been listening to you, and I've got to tell you right up front, I am a strong proponent of Texas secession. And also, I'm a transplant from a foreign state. My big question is, what will we do with all the United States federal installations that are currently in Texas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually gave some space to that in my book. But what it boils down to is there is this process that we go through, right? There's I heard it said during the Brexit debate that independence is not an act. It's not embodied in a single act. It's a state of being. And we have to have a referendum because that's part of the process, and we have to go out there and we have to scrum it up and we have to fight and we have to win it. But on the other side of that, Independence Day +1, nothing different really happens. There's a process that's initiated. Part of that process is this negotiated exit, right? It's kind of like I liken it a lot of times to a divorce. When you go through a divorce, you don't really have too much say in whether the divorce is going to happen or not, but you do have some discussions over the children, the property, and the money. And the federal installations is one of those. And depending on the type of federal installation, there are some likely scenarios that will happen based on, looking at this issue over as it's happened around the world in the last 70-something years. Federal buildings, things of that nature, will probably wind up, most of those are leased anyway, will wind up probably reverting, into Texas facilities. Perhaps there may be a payout on any remainders of the lease. When you look at military installations, those would, I think Texas would definitely push for those to revert to Texas hands, probably under joint management, under a mutual defense agreement. There are a lot of different types of federal installations, a lot of different types of negotiations that have to happen regarding each type.
And what about Social Security and situations like that?
Great. That's a great question. And I'll tell you, that is actually the most asked question that we get. But here's how the Social Security thing works. First and foremost, we actually pay more. Texans pay more into the Social Security system than we currently receive, right? So we're basically lopsided on the number of Social Security retirement benefit recipients versus how much is going in. And that's a reflection really of the Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme nature of the Social Security system. But that being said, the United States, right on the federal government's website, they pay out earned Social Security benefits to people who don't live in the United States. So if you're a retiree right now and you move to a foreign country, as long as that foreign country is not Belarus, Cuba, or North Korea, you still receive your Social Security retirement benefits. For those people that have paid into the system and are currently paying into the system, internationally, that works under what are called totalization agreements. And the United States has them with, dozens and dozens and dozens of nations, where essentially if you work part of your time in the United States and then go work in another country, what they do is they tote those working years, those, working quarters as they call them, are totaled up, and you receive retirement benefits based off of the total work, so you're not receiving two checks. So there is a mechanism. There are mechanisms already in place for retirees to continue to receive their Social Security payouts, as long as the federal government doesn't bankrupt the system, right? There are mechanisms that are already in place for Texans who have already paid into the system to, essentially get credit for that money that they paid in and not have to start fresh. Ultimately, though, here's what we do know. Based off of the amount of overpayment that we pay into the union every single solitary year, if the United States federal government decided to kind of, welch on the deal and say that, forget you Texans, we're not going to give you any money that you paid in, we still have enough that we already overpay into the federal system that we could pay every single solitary earned benefit and probably do a whole heck of a lot better than those unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
What do you think will possibly be the proverbial federal straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of Texans to go, enough's enough, we want out of here? I'm thinking Puerto Rico, John, there's 2 senators there. They're counting on D.C. becoming a state. That's 2 there. Before you know it, if that all happens with the threats they're making in Washington right now, then that's got to do something.
Look, I'll say this, and I've said this for many years, and for the longest time people thought I was nuts, but I believe that Texas independence is an inevitability. It is going to happen. One of the things that we have seen consistently is the poll numbers climb, right? So when our organization was founded in 2005, pro-independent supporters polled in single digits. And then the shock poll happened in 2009, the Research 2000 poll that showed 50% of Republicans in Texas were on board with independence. They thought that Texas would be better off as an independent nation. Then in 2014, during the Scottish independence referendum, there was a Reuters Ipsos poll that showed 54% of Republicans, half of independent voters, and 35% of Democrats that supported independence. And so as the federal government dysfunction continues to be on display, those numbers continue to climb. Right now, if we were to go to a referendum, right, as it stands this very moment, we know that those people in Texas that support independence are poll higher than those people who are absolutely opposed to it, with anywhere from 12 to 16 percentage points of undecided. So we're not at a majority, but we're at a plurality, and the difference is we can make the case. But, to your question about what would be the catalyzing event, I mean, there are any number of things that the federal government could do that would absolutely accelerate the process. Blatant violations of the Bill of Rights or a shift in the system of government. Biden's, suggestion that the Democrats may try to pack the Supreme Court. You mentioned the admission of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as granting them statehood. There are, Beto's gun confiscation program centrally managed on a federal level. I mean, there are any number of political policies or economic policies that could push this to happen faster. So it's incumbent upon us, though, I think, before those sorts of things happen, to lay the groundwork so that we can have a peaceful, orderly exit. It's been our argument since day one. The ability for us to exit on terms that are most favorable to us in a manner that causes the least disruption.
Well, Daniel, you said something way back when you very first started talking, and I was curious. You said something about Governor Abbott's power, and there was a problem with that. Explain that.
Well, look, we've gotten a lot of criticism lately for going pretty hard at Greg Abbott. But Greg Abbott has never been a friend of Texas independence, right? He's when he was Attorney General, he had an opportunity to work with then Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst's office and us on a referendum bill, a piece of legislation related to an independence vote, and he blocked it because he was concerned about its effect on his run for governor that was, impending. It was the worst kept secret in Austin, very much like his desire to be, run for president in 2024. So, I think that, the criticism that we've given Abbott over the years has been sort of dismissed. And what we're finding out, especially in this era of the COVID lockdowns and the inconsistency that we're seeing out of Abbott, I think a lot of people are coming around to our viewpoint and our perspective on him, especially when you have a sitting governor that has essentially ruled by decree. That is about the least Texan thing you can find. As a matter of fact, I think in 1836 we had a little something to say about heads of state that rule by decree. We were not big fans here in Texas of that sort of thing. Matter of fact, this is the anniversary of the Battle of Gonzales, where they hoisted the Come and Take It flag in defiance of a decree from a dictator. So, the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court has said that COVID-19, a quote-unquote state of emergency is not a rationale to suspend the Constitution. But Abbott has definitely ignored that. You look at the how quickly he jumped on the COVID-19 bandwagon without assessing all of the facts. Having these hyperbolic apocalypse pornographers whispering in his ear and fear mongering without doing his due diligence. And what do you have? You have a Texas economy that has practically been decimated. You've got Texas workers, some of the highest unemployment that Texas has seen in a very, very long time. You've got business owners that are suffering and shuttering their businesses, and all of this is laid at the feet of the man who is issuing the decrees, and that is Governor Greg Abbott.
Well, we have been talking this morning to Daniel Miller of the Texas Nationalist movement, and Daniel, we want to have you back again and tell our listeners where they might go and get lots and lots more information. You said you have a book. What's the name of it, and where can they pick that up? Absolutely.
The book is called Texit, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union. You can get it at any online bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. But if you want to find out more about the movement, the actual organization, the Texas Nationalist movement, and the work that we're doing, not just on the Texit referendum, but on our economic and cultural independence as well, you can visit our website at tnm.me. That's TNM, like Texas Nationalist Movement.me.
All right, Daniel Miller, thank you so much.
Hey, thank y'all. Y'all have a great day.
You too.